morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear colleagues and guests of the conference. We are happy you joined the third day of Business Analysis and Product Management that Day conference. My name is Alexandra Kovalyova and I'm going to help our today's speaker to facilitate this session. First of all, I'd like to introduce to our expert and speaker of today. It is Kymbat Yeltayeva, Business Analysis Team Leader from EPAM, Kazakhstan, and her presentation, Mistakes I Made as a Business Analyst. Before we start, I'd like to know that this session is being recorded and the recording will be available later on our YouTube channel, and you'll get all the links available. Also, all the event participants are muted by default, but you could post your questions in the Q&A chat on the right side by hitting Ask a Question field. And please vote for the most liked question, put in your likes. We'd like to encourage you to post your questions using your name, not anonymously, because there is a competition on the conference for the most active and for best questions. So we are ready to start. I'll pass to Kymbat. Kymbat, welcome.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Hello, dear all. Thank you for joining today's talk. As Alexandra mentioned, my name is Kymbat Yeltayeva, and today I'm going to talk about mistakes I made as a business analyst. So first and foremost, the agenda today will talk about mistakes in terms of impact mapping. So we'll talk why I decided to do this speech about mistakes, why to talk about mistakes at all. Next is who am I and my BA journey. Also, we'll talk about how can we benefit from mistakes. And also, of course, what mistakes I made. Before we move on, for those of you who participate in the quest, please pay attention to this slide. There's a keyword on this slide, and best of luck with this puzzle with the quest. Okay, now we're ready to start. So who am I? I'm a business analysis team leader working for EPAM in Almaty, Kazakhstan. And also I'm leading a BAs on the insurance project. My BA journey as an activity diagram. So I started my journey in 2012 at EPAM Nur-Sultan. Back then it was Astana. I was a middle business analyst and I worked for a number of domains such as metals and mining, taxes, state services, and agriculture. In 2014, I moved to another city, still working for EPAM, and this time I was working as a business analyst on a client side. I had a number of projects in oil and gas domain, and also in 2015, I was promoted to a senior business analyst position. Around that time, I also became an expert in the Global Assessment Committee, helping our colleagues BA from around the globe to estimate, to assess their BA knowledge. In 2016, I left to another city, to Almaty, still in Kazakhstan, and I started to work for one of the biggest and leading banks, Kaspi Bank. There, I was a business analysis team lead, and I was working on e-commerce platform. Actually, it's the biggest e-commerce platform in Kazakhstan. In 2017, though, I came back to EPAM in Almaty and started from the scratch the project for insurance domain. I was a lead business analyst, and at the same time, I was a resource manager managing a team of BAs. I had a role of BA mentor. And recently, I also became a certified technical interviewee, helping EPAM to hire BAs from the market. In 2018, I was promoted to business analysis team leader, and currently I'm also an assessment committee head, driving the committee to assess the knowledge of BAs globally. So this is it from my BA journey and about myself. And now, guys, I would like to know about you. And for that, please open the Mentimeter website. You can do it either by following this QR code, which you see on this screen, or following the link, which Alexandra will post in the chat. And also you can open the website yourself and enter this code. Once you do so, you will see this form. Please enter your name, your role, and country where you're from, so we could meet each other, we could know each other better. Let's take some time. I hope you guys didn't have any problems accessing the Mentimeter. Please don't be shy. Tell us about yourself. Name, your role, and country where you're coming from. Perfect. I see the answers already. Let's have a look. I see Natalia, product owner from Ukraine. Daria Kuzmenkova, BA from Belarus. Irina, product manager from Belarus. QA engineer from Ukraine. Middle BAs, business analysts from Kazakhstan, Poland, Russia, Hungary, Novgorod, Kazakhstan, Belarus. Wow, it's so nice to see you all here. Yeah, so I see that many people from Belarus, some from Netherlands, from Russia, from Switzerland, from Armenia, from again Belarus, Kazakhstan, from Vietnam. We also have people here. We have people from China, from Russia. And I'm very happy to see BAs of all levels here, also product managers, product owners as well, middle BAs, QA as well, solution architects from Netherlands, BA from Poland, greetings, hi guys, student from Ukraine, from Czech Republic, from Belarus, from Russia, QA, BA. Wow, I'm so happy to see you all here. BA from Netherlands, senior BA from Russia, middle QA from Belarus, junior BA from Belarus. Okay, let's have one more minute to meet all of you. Hi, Luna, senior BA from China. Hello. That's great. We're all over the world, mostly BAs, but I'm happy to see that other people like QA, product owners, product managers also joined. Senior BA from India, Minsk. Very nice to meet all of you guys. Okay, so now that we all know each other a bit better, and thank you for coming in today, we can move on and talk, first of all, why this page on mistakes? Why to talk about mistakes when all we want to do is to forget about them? Usually we're so ashamed of mistakes, we try not to raise them up, forget about them, and move on. I'll use the quotes of famous people, such as Albert Einstein, who says, "A person who never made a mistake never tried anything new." Or Steve Jobs, who said, "Fail fast, fail often." Experience is simply the name we give our mistakes. Mistakes are proof that you are trying, and the greatest mistake you can make in life is continually fearing that you'll make one. So as you see, all of these sayings are telling us, do not be afraid to make mistakes. It's better to make them, to learn something new and move on. And I hope that by sharing my mistakes today with you, we'll all learn something new. Okay, so which mistakes I made? As you see on this use case diagram, it's actually failure case diagram, there are 7 main categories of mistakes I'll talk about today. First, I made mistakes in focus. Also, I failed in BA processes, in BA role, and also in BA approach. And of course, I failed in communications, both in customer communications and in team communications. So these are all categories, and on this user story mapping or failure mapping, you can see the actual mistakes on the cards. We'll talk about each of them one by one. Before we proceed, I would like to offer you opportunity to learn which mistake we made, which mistake is the most popular. For this, my colleague Alexandra will post the name of the mistake about which I will talk to the chat, and I encourage you guys to vote for this mistake. At the end of this speech, we will see which mistake got the most votes, and so we'll all know which mistake was the most popular among us. Okay? So please don't forget to vote for the mistakes which Alexandra will post in the chat. Let's begin. So first category is failing in focus. Failing in focus, the first mistake is focusing on the solution instead of problem. The example of the mistake was from one of my recent projects where we were working on the notification system. And we were so in love with this feature. We always talked about this feature right from the beginning of the project. We talked about how fancy it's gonna be, how, which details it will have, maybe which UX and design it will have. And we forgot to focus on the problem. Which problem we're trying to solve with this notification system? Maybe it's a problem that our users are not informed enough about the trends in the market, on the market. Or maybe it's the problem that we want to inform our users about specifics of the product. Or maybe it's a problem just that we want to improve our brand as a company, because as you see, depending on the problem we're trying to solve, there can be different solution and different focus within that feature. So the solution I found for myself valuable was to ask why we want this. As the saying goes, before falling in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. Focus on the why you want this, and I believe this simple question may influence greatly the solutions you may provide. So if you did have this mistake, please vote for it in the chat. The next mistake I made was focusing on the output instead of outcome. The example goes back to the beginning of my career when I was working in waterfall methodology. And there we wrote different, very long specifications, which nobody read. And I was working so hard on the specifications, putting their diagrams and nice use case scenarios and all of these tiny details. And then it was very sad for me to realize that it was not very popular among the team to read the specification. So the solution could be is to ask yourself which effect you want to have. And in the case of the specification, the effect I was trying to reach is to establish the common ground, to have the shared understanding for the features, for the functionality, for the business problem we're trying to solve. So depending on the outcome you want to reach, you can have different approaches. So don't focus on the outputs. Think about the outcomes you are trying to reach. As the Garrett's case says, be obsessed with the outcome we create, not with the output we make. Again, if you had this mistake in your experience, you can vote for it. The next category is failing in BA role. The first mistake in this category is very interesting, is performing secretary, but not a business analyst role. Again, at the beginning of my career as BA, I was working on the project and I was just passing information between product owner and delivery team on my first project. Whenever my team, like developers or QA, would ask me a question, I would say you know what, I'm gonna write it down, I'm gonna ask stakeholders about it. Or whenever business representatives like PO or anyone else would ask me a question about some technical implications, I would also say, let me write it down, I'll pass this information to the delivery team. Business analyst has the analyst word in the title, because we need to analyze information, not just write it down and passing it. So the solution here could be to challenge opinions, to ask questions, to consider technical complexity versus business value, basically to analyze wherever you get, whichever information you are asked with, and to try not just write it down, but also analyze it and provide the answer. If you always do what is easy and choose the path of least resistance, you never step outside of your comfort zone. Great things don't come from comfort zones. They come when you go the stretch, do the stretch, go beyond, do this extra mile. So I know that secretarial is a comforting zone, it's easy, but the beauty of our profession is to be able to make the impact to analyze information. So this mistake I had, um, the next mistake in this category in BA role is being afraid to ask questions. So example was that at the beginning of the project, actually it was at the beginning of any project, I was trying to appear smart. So, I would think, okay, if I'm gonna ask this question, people would think that I'm, silly, and I didn't want this. That's why I was like, whenever, even if it's not clear to me, I would like, okay, like I understand this. But the thing is that if you will be open and vulnerable and not being afraid to show that you don't understand something and asking the right questions would save you so much trouble, because we have the luxury of asking the questions at the beginning of the project, because probably people don't expect that you would understand everything. The Chinese proverb goes, that person who asks a question remains a fool for 5 minutes, but that person who does ask question, that person who doesn't ask question remains a fool forever. So I'm not encouraging you to ask many questions, and especially those questions for which you can find answers for yourself. But what I'm trying to say here, I guess, to avoid the mistake I had, do not be afraid to ask questions. So if you did have this mistake as well, please vote in the chat. The next mistake in this category is lack of preparation. And specifically, it's about preparing for workshops and meetings. For example, like skipping agenda and sending just an empty invite for the workshop. Or, whenever we had this long day workshop, elicitation workshops, and we had to have breaks every hour, I was like, no, please, can we just finish very quickly, wrap up with this topic, and then this topic would go for another half an hour. Or also asking questions and not preparing enough in advance, asking questions which could be easily found on my own. All of this might seem as like very small things, as tiny things, but actually it's tiny things which make the big picture, and your professionalism also comes together out of these details. So what I found helped me, the solution I found for myself, is putting myself in the shoes of stakeholders, trying to think, okay, having an agenda would help people to prepare for the meeting, to be more efficient at the meeting. And also having breaks, it would make them refreshed and continue with better ideas maybe. Basically, just respecting stakeholders' time and energy would contribute to better relationship with them. As Benjamin Franklin says, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. So I believe paying attention to these tiny details saved me from many mistakes. This was it for the failing in BA role category. And now we are moving on to failing in BA approach. And the first mistake in this category is sticking only to known. Being afraid to try something new, something creative, because in BA there are certain set of techniques like elicitation techniques or prioritization techniques, which you get used to. And sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable to try something new. In my experience, it was that I loved this Moscow technique, prioritization technique, and I used on any projects, and it was my comfortable technique. And then at some point of time, we were faced with the problem to estimate MVP scope. And Moscow technique didn't help much at that time because there were a lot of things which customer wanted to do. And if we prioritize it by Moscow, most of the things would be a must. So what we did is we started to search, to ask, to learn, to try, and at EPAM we have many sources where we can share our BA knowledge. So we approached people via those sources. And we found this canon model technique for prioritizing MVP, and it helped us. So basically, resisting the new, something new, I didn't do very good for my project. By trying and learning, you can introduce something valuable to your projects, to your team. And also don't forget to share what you've learned. If you did have this mistake, you can put a like on this message, which Alexandra puts in our chat. The next mistake in this category is insufficient use of visuals. You know, it's funny because at some point of time, I assumed that visual always had to be perfect. You know, like having this diagram in the UML notation or preparing some BPMN flow in perfect details and only then sharing it in conversation with the business or with any stakeholders. But later I realized that a picture worth 1,000 words. Sometimes you don't have a proper time to prepare, or maybe you're just talking to the business just at this moment, and you can already support your message with any kind of visual. You can open Visio or any other tool for diagrams, and you can start it drawing this diagram. Maybe not perfect, but I believe that use of visuals is important for BAs because it will enhance their common understanding. Next group of mistakes, it's failing in BA terminology. What I mean here, like failing to establish one common terminology. When on the project, I used for one notion, I could use two different words. Example could be, for example, having benefit and capital as two different notions, of two different terms for the same insured amount understanding, right? So insured amount is benefit or capital, and I didn't agree on one common word for this. It could lead to many complications, starting from having duplications in code, in requirements, in misunderstandings with the stakeholders. And the solution here is to establish shared foundation for terminology. Like most of the project, right, or all of the project have these glossaries or domain models and so forth. But it's also important, which I found for myself, is that refining this glossary, paying attention if you catch something, even if it's the middle of the project, sometimes there can be new terminology, and paying attention to this terminology can make sure that we don't use two different words for the same thing. The next mistake in this category is using technical language. I was using technical language with business and team, and it was early in my career. Example could be that I thought that by using these nice words like API, methods, calls, I thought that I appear smarter. I thought that by this I prove that I have some technical background and I'm cool. And again, it could be different complications. And I believe that, again, the beauty of BA role is to be able not to talk about on the technical language, but actually translate the technical language into business contexts, into business needs. And the solution, again, it's just being mindful and realizing and ensuring that there is a business problem for each technical solution. Whenever I find myself or someone else from the business talking using the technical terminology, I'm trying to translate it and reformulate it using business terminology. If you did have this mistake, just a reminder to vote for it in the chat as well. Okay, next category of mistakes is interesting. It's failing in user stories. The first mistake is writing stories with no stories. What I mean here is writing user stories without business context. Example could be like display the list of instrument tags on the home page, or click on the button and form shall be opened, or something like this. It's a very big topic, I believe, but what I'm trying to say here is business analyst, his main value is to provide business problem and business need to the delivery team, to provide the story why we're doing this, to tell the delivery team what is the business need, which is what is their needs, what is the context on which we want to solve this problem. So basically, instead of just writing these short and dry sentences, I believe it's better to provide as much context as possible for the delivery team, to provide the story. As the saying goes, the human species think in metaphors and learn through stories. So I do believe that business analysts need to be a very good storyteller. The next mistake in this category is failing and providing too much details in user stories. I did it myself. And the example here, again, like user clicks the button and form must open. And for some of you, it might think like it's pretty normal requirement, like what is the problem here? But the thing is that I believe it can be different contexts. But the main message here is that by providing too much details, first of all, you are becoming a bottleneck because you need to write all these details instead of focusing on the business context, on the business need, on the business problem. All you do is writing these details. And also, it's kind of, there is certain connotation and certain very small, but this thought that isn't like delivery team or development team is smart enough to realize that when person clicks on the button, something must open. It's like, I do believe that it goes together with trust. Giving enough trust to the development to provide the right solution by if business analyst provides and articulates the right business problem and provide enough information from business perspective to them. Again, I think that this mistake is pretty common one. I did it myself so many times. So again, if you found yourself in here, you can vote for it. The next category of mistakes is failing in customer communication. So the first mistake is insufficient customer communication. One example could be is when I was waiting for customer to approach me rather than trying to proactively establish communication. Especially it happened with those difficult stakeholders, if you know what I mean, those who may seem angry or may challenge you, and you're like, okay, I'm not gonna talk to them, and if they do need me, they will approach me. But the thing is that by doing this, we're just delaying the problem. We're not solving it. So what I found valuable for myself is it's rather better to over communicate than under communicate. Because if we have smooth and good communication in the team, it may save us from many problems. Communication leads to community. That is to understanding, intimacy, and mutual valuing. So whenever you find yourself, thinking that, okay, it's fine, I'm not going to talk to them, maybe we need to ask ourselves question, and I do it myself. Maybe I do need to establish certain communication channel to ensure the smooth communication. Next mistake in this category is missing stakeholders. And I think this is pretty common mistake in business analysis. Again, if you had this, please vote for it. So the example is that on one of the projects, I engaged security department, but not compliance stakeholder. For some reason, I had this assumption that, security would cover compliance stakeholders requirements, and the risk here is that I assumed something, right? I know that it's like, as the saying goes, like there's always one more stakeholder than you know about it, and the non-stakeholder have at least one more need that you know about it. Basically, maybe we can even not tell that, okay, we're done with stakeholders, we identified all stakeholders. It's a continuous process. But at the same time, I believe that what leads to mistake here is assuming, as I did in my case, right? So what helps me is carrying out consistent and continuous stakeholder analysis, asking, engaging, and do not assuming. Next category is failing in team communications. The first mistake which I did is being a wall between development team and the customer. This is when I was like, okay, guys, if you have questions, ask myself. I'm gonna talk and ask from business these questions all by my own. And it was to do with developers, with QA, with everyone, being this, one single point of contact. Well, I do believe that having our developers and QA team talking directly with the customer would provide better business and business context to the team, which is very important for them to solve their tasks and user stories better. So the solution I found myself is becoming a bridge and not the wall for our development team and QA and automation and everyone in the team, and having them directly communicating with customer. If you did have this mistake as well, pulling the vet on yourself, as we say, the Russian saying goes, please put a like on this mistake if you had it. The next mistake here is failing in establishing proper communication with UX, having a distance with user experience team. Example could be when on one of the previous projects, we were building this mobile application from the scratch for online bank, and UX just providing design, business analysis just providing the requirements, and we were talking to each other, but we did not actually share information with each other. For example, user experience, they have perfect knowledge about users because on that project, UX were conducting continuous focus groups. They were having these personas, very, good personas description. They had user testing results. They understood pain points of the users. And I'm, as a BA, failed to have this information. And in return, I didn't give any business context to UX. So I think that it's important to communicate and share and have enough collaboration with the UX team. Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean, as the saying goes. So collaboration and collaboration with UX team in this case is important. Again, if you had these mistakes, let's put a like on it. And this was the last mistake I wanted to share with you today. And now, drum rolls, let's see which mistake had the most votes by you. Let us give you guys another 30 seconds maybe, just so that you could go through all mistakes which Alexandra posted in the chat and vote for those you had made as well.
Yeah,
okay, Alexandra.
We wait. I already see there is one mistake that had most votes,
Uh-huh.
received most likes from our attendees today. So this is mistake number one, failing in focus, solution instead of problem.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be nice, Kim, if you comment this. Why do you think it's happened that this mistake, especially this one, got most likes
Yeah.
of all of us?
Yeah,
Failing in
thank you.
focus, solution instead of problem.
Yeah, thank you for voting, guys. And actually, I think that this mistake is also very important. And I believe we make this mistake because it's naturally because we build the systems, we build solution. That's why we are aimed at focusing on the solution. And I think that it takes a lot of maturity to understand that the solution is only part of the problem. The actual problem is focusing on the right problem, right? So yeah, I think it's very interesting to see that this mistake got the most likes because, to be honest, in my experience, I also realized it's later, after, like, I've been in the business analysis for 8 years, and I think after only 6 years or some years, I realized that the problem is important first. And then the next mistake.
Yeah, there is the second mistake that got also almost all the same number of points, 40 votes. Mistake number four, failing in BA role, being afraid to ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just our inclination as human beings. It's pretty natural to be afraid to be vulnerable, right? It's about vulnerability, and it's not that I'm completely brave right now and always ask questions. Even like now, after all these years, I still sometimes find myself that, okay, I'm a bit tentative here to ask any questions. So yeah, guys, I'm with you here. Basically, we all have these mistakes as human beings. It's great.
Yeah, and the third place got detailed user stories mistake, failing in user stories, and also we got some question regarding the user stories from our guests and
Mhm.
colleagues today. So this is very important also.
Yeah, I think this can be a very long debate, to be honest, because I did find myself in this debate with my delivery team and with different BA professionals from, different levels. We can say on the other hand, on the one hand, we can say, okay, it always depends on the project. It's, different context, different projects. But at the same times, I do believe that having too much detail in user stories in details hurts rather than helps. So this is difficult topic because it's about right balance. And to find this right balance, you need to try. There is no blueprint that, I could tell you, you need to write user stories this way and it will work for you. No, because it's different for each project. But if you do not balance and if you do not try, it's difficult to say what is the right level of details here. Thank you so much, guys, for voting. Um, I see the votes that we had many votes, actually, up to 45 votes. Thank you so much. And to be honest, I'm happy that I'm not alone in making these mistakes. We're all, BAs, and it's not an easy job to do. And I know that we have these mistakes. And the last part of my speech today, the last slide, is actually how can we benefit from mistakes? Because we will make it anyway. So the first thing, again, let's not be afraid to make mistakes. Let's try and let's learn from them. And important thing as well is move on, because sometimes I can find myself being stuck on certain mistake, but it doesn't help. We need to make it, learn from it, and move on. That was it. Now we can move on to the questions part. Alexandra, you said that we had some questions.
Yes, thank you, Kim, for valuable presentation. And the first most voted question we've got from Rita Provitz, and
Mhm.
she is asking regarding the detailed user stories. So How to cope with that situation when the development team expect this kind of details. Most of the time, I know that my stories are so detailed, however, the team would like to know in written form all information so that they're able to work independently on the stories continuously.
Thank you very much, Rita, for your question, because it's a very good question. And I was facing with it myself at some point of my work. So I believe that first thing is to have right environment, right spirit in the team. Because I find that why development team or QA team, why they ask for detailed user stories? Because they're afraid that they'll miss something and they will be punished, right? If I was working on that project where people would say, we made this mistake because Kymbat didn't write it in the user story. Or QA team would say, we didn't notice this bug because it wasn't in the requirements. But the thing is that we cannot put everything into the requirements. So answering your question, Rita, I think the first thing is to establish this context of it's okay to fail. Of course, it depends which failure it is and so forth. But I think if we have this encouraging spirit in the team, not punishing anyone for making mistakes, then development team will be at least not that afraid to make them. And the second thing is, again, as I said, what we did and what I also suggest to have is to say, okay, let's try. Let's find the right level of details. Let's have one experimentation user story. When I provide as less details as possible, we're going to see how it goes. And then we can try and find this thing. So basically, my suggestion is first to have the right environment to talk through that it's okay if we miss something, we're going to discuss it. Because it's not that user stories are placeholders for discussion. It's not that we need to write everything. It's that we need to write and communicate more. So basically establish the environment, first thing. Second thing, communicate, collaborate more within the team. And third thing, go ahead and experiment and try different level of details.
Thank you, Kim. Another question, how to best start with a new and complex project that will be executed by an external agency? I'd like to make sure not to miss critical requirements that they are covered in the contract proposal.
Yeah, it's always difficult to start the project, and I can feel your pain. Thank you for the question. So it's many different things, and I think that first of all, we need to gather as much information as possible about the company, about the project goals, if there is some information about the domain, about this external agency. So gather information, go through it from different sources, from internal company sources if possible, from external, from internet, from everywhere, right? The first thing. Also, what I believe could help is making sure that you have the stakeholders analysis done, meaning that analyzing who needs to be involved at which point, not assuming, as I shared at some point of my presentation, asking around and making sure that you are covering the set of stakeholders which is required. And also, I think it's important to establish communication with this external agency, and not only, right, with everyone, every key person which you identify as a result of your stakeholder analysis. Because by constantly communicating, you are minimizing the risk that you will miss some requirements. So I would say, yeah, this is a question, and ask right questions and not being afraid to ask questions as well. Good luck with the project.
Thank you. Another popular question today, what sources, books, URLs, videos have you used and found most useful for building competence from beginner to intermediate and to senior BA?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I always also looking for different sources of information. So I would say my the book which helped me is Carl Vigger's Software Requirements. It's I was reading it in Russian back then. It's pretty big book, but it's worth reading because it provides this foundation. It's also pretty old book, but I think it still has this good insights. Um, Another, of course, it's BA book, Business Analysis Body of Knowledge. Some BAs are complaining that it's pretty boring, but I do believe that it's worth reading. Another book I loved is Software Requirements Memory Jogger, Ellen Goldsberg. I believe I'm mispronouncing her surname. The difference between this book, Software Requirements Memory Jogger, and the other two is that the Software Requirements Memory Jogger is shorter and it has more techniques. Let's say it's more practical in a way. Also, I like author Mike Cohn. He's more into agile, and he also has some agile BA related books like Agile User Stories Applied and Agile Estimation and Planning. It's also another book of his. He also has good blog on the Mountain Goat software. Also, at this moment, I'm reading more about lean product development. I like this lean product playbook, the first book, and another book which I found valuable is Inspired: How to Create Products Customers Love. Also, if you are interested in specific techniques, there's a book by Jeff Patton, user story mapping. It's very good technique. If you haven't tried it, I would suggest you to have a go for it. It's a good technique to visualize and to kind of have your backlog scoped. And also user story, like user story impact mapping, another technique which is also useful. And there is a separate book by this author. Basically, there are a lot of different books. I can go on about this forever, but I think me and Alexandra will put these books I mentioned into the answers, and you can find them in written format.
Yes, we've just got these questions if it will be available, this list of books, and we'll definitely post it on our community that page with all the answers. I will give you a link later to that. And one more question, Kim, what's your favorite tool for diagramming?
I use Visio. It's pretty standard because mostly we are doing this UML diagrams. I know that there are different, like for example, Miro board. It also has different. It has nice UX. I think Miro board, but I prefer good and old Visio diagrams, Microsoft Visio diagrams.
Great. One more question. In the absence of product owner, sometimes business analyst has to act as product owner. In this case, how can business analyst come up with the RACI matrix? Means how could BA identify the key stakeholders without PO? And how could the BA come up with the product backlog items? This is one of the major challenges that business analyst faces in real time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if as far as I understood, in this project there is no product owner, and I think in this case it's a BA who takes this role, and I believe that product owner role it's also about taking the responsibility. So answering the question how BA could come up with the RACI matrix, we need to make sure that we have enough access to business. I know that it's easy to say but difficult to do, to get the access to business and get some time face to face with business, but I believe it's critical. If you are product owner, you need to get information from different stakeholders, ensuring that you have this interface with these stakeholders. So the only thing which I can recommend for RACI matrix, I believe, is to establish the communication with different stakeholders. First of all, of course, identifying these key stakeholders. It's engaging different departments, asking, going around, and only by communicating with others. And For the product backlog items as well, like you can use whichever technique is there, like user story mapping or whichever is there, but all you need to do is hold some kind of workshop or gather all the stakeholders which you identify together and brainstorm on the product backlog with key stakeholders. This is the only way to go. I hope I covered your question.
Thank you, Kim. One more question about the user stories and scenarios. Should the story cover all the scenarios, or is it important or only edge? Sorry. So I will start one more time because it was kind of technical issues. Should the story cover all the scenarios, or is it important or only edge cases with visuals and examples?
That's a good question. I believe one story should cover one business case. I mean, again, it all depends on different things, which level of granularity or how to split user stories. There are different techniques for splitting user stories, but basically, I believe that if you identify some alternative scenarios or edge cases, they are different user stories. For example, you can have a user story, share, actually it might be even an epic, right? Share a report, and then share a report via email, or share a report by printing, or share a report when internet is offline. It's all different user stories. I think that visuals, as suggested, and examples, they need to support user story, not expand it. So each and every edge case could be a different user story in this case.
Thank you. Could you tell us, Kim, please, about the right questions? What are they like? What do they cover?
Yeah, I think it goes to my example in the presentation where I said asking the right question. This is a right question, actually. Actually, it's difficult to say because it depends on the specific example. But I would say, if we are specific, that when I try and gather all the information available on the topic, when I prepare with the meeting with stakeholder, right? And then in my head there can be many different questions, right? And then I cover my questions as much as possible by my own research, because wrong question could be, first example is when you ask questions which you could find yourself. Another wrong question could be, again, focusing on the solution instead of problem at the beginning of some feature. Or also, right questions is when you feel that there's something might be wrong with this thing and you voice it out, because sometimes I find myself that I'm afraid to challenge it. I was like, okay, the stakeholder sounds pretty confident. Maybe I shouldn't ask this question. He's so sure. He's been in the domain so long. I'm not going to ask it. But the right question is a question which you have inside of you. If you want to challenge it, you need to challenge it. So this is a it depends, but the right question is based on the research you've done, based the question which clarifies the assumption, not just assuming something.
Thank you. One more question. What approach you used with stakeholders who are not in the position to openly say no to all your changes that you're specifying, but in fact would rather not change anything?
Yeah, it's another good question. I also had some stakeholders who are too nice sometimes, and they don't want to challenge, or they don't want to say no to you because they're afraid that they will offend you or something. So I think what might help is to give this room for them to say no. Basically, instead of like pushing the solution or saying that, being too confident, you can lay around, like, lay in front of him this option, like, we can consider it from different perspective. We can have a different opinions on here because we want to try to find the right problem and the right solution. So basically, by providing this opportunity for him to say no, and also again, just maybe having for some stakeholders, it helps having uh, rounds and rounds of communications. I'll tell you a story. Um, on one of the projects, at the beginning of the project, apart from all of the agile ceremonies which we had, and we had, groomings on top of everything else, and there are a lot of communication points with our product owner. We also suggested to have 1 hour, as we call it, BA sync with the product owner. And I felt that it was a doubt by product owner, like, really, you sure we will need every day 1 hour on top of everything, every other meeting we have? I was like, yeah, let's try it, let's go for it. And it's been third year that we every single day we do have these BA syncs, as we call it. It's not a formal agile ceremony, it's on top of everything else, but what it does, it establishes these grounds. And I find that stakeholders, after you have enough communication, you have this channel with them, they are okay to say no. Also, what's important, this is kind of one-to-one session. Of course, sometimes whenever UX team, development team, QA team wants to attend it, we do it all together. But also, I think in the question, like what could help this person to say no is you can talk to him face to face. Maybe this person is not comfortable to say no in front of everyone else. This could be another approach.
Thank you, Kim. And another question, we have still 3 minutes, so maybe we'll be in time to answer it. If you're assigned to work in a project which has very new domain to you, how can you deal with this thing, and how can you build trust with the customer?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty common thing for business analysts to find yourself in this situation on the domain. And let me just show you briefly how many times I was on the new domain. It's even more than that, actually. I didn't count a small project. So basically, if you can prepare as much as possible in advance of the project, it's worth doing so. So whenever I had an opportunity to have training, it can be any training online, or I can go through some information which I found in the Google. And also, if I have other colleagues working in this domain, I would also ask these people to share with me information they have. And if these people also willing to share with you some kind of meeting, I would ask them to hold meeting, basically to try and gather again as much information as possible. On the other hand, I understand that sometimes you are so overwhelmed at the beginning because it's a new domain and it's too much. I would say that have a biteable sizes of information. It's okay not to know everything at the beginning. Again, asking questions. And establishing trust, it's very, very good point here, because it's a new domain for you. You need to build trust with the customer and so forth. Most of the time, customer is okay and open and willing to share with you at the beginning of the project. It will not be okay if maybe you're 2 years into the domain and then you're asking questions, right? But at the beginning of the question, I mean, some simple questions, but at the beginning of the question, asking some questions about domain, which you couldn't research on your own, it's okay. And also, I find that I gained trust with customer when they saw that I did my homework, that I prepared as much as possible. Even if it's just a week or a day for you to prepare, try to prepare as much as possible. Also, what I do, I draw diagrams and I support some visuals. I talk to people. I ask around. I try to, reach as much people as possible. And then if I do prepare my homework, the trust comes that if people see that I'm prepared.
Great answers. Thank you, Kim, very much for meaningful presentation. And I want to thank all the attendees for coming today to our session. All the answers that we were not in time to answer, we'll answer later in our discussion chat that I post the link to in this chat. Thank you very much. And please vote for our session today on Community Z page. Have a good day. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye bye.